Here presently, but before we do, I got to say before I get any further, it's kind of nice having everybody on the right-hand side. It's a lot easier to keep everybody in view when you don't spread yourselves out too far. Which is not to speak disparagingly of anybody who might come in later, but before we get started, we'll stop. We'll have a word of prayer, and then we'll read it and talk about it. So if you'd pray with me, please. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this world that you have made. We thank you for this word that you have given to us. We thank you for revealing yourself to us through your creation and through your word. And Father, through the gift of your Son, we are grateful for this time and this opportunity to study and ask that you would bless us as we do study and contemplate and discuss your word, that we may better understand it, may better understand you, and Father, better understand your will for our lives, that we can do as you would have us do. We are grateful, Father, for all the gifts and the blessings you have bestowed, the many things you have done and continue to do, but we are most thankful, particularly on this day as we remember your Son and his rising from the dead. We are grateful for the gift of salvation that he brought, and we pray all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right. Psalm 95. Come, let us sing unto Yahweh. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. For Yahweh is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the deep places of the earth. The heights of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, and he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before Yahweh, our Maker. Excuse me. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, oh, that you would hear his voice. Harden not your heart as at Meribah, as in the day of Massah in the wilderness, when your fathers tested me, proved me, and saw my work. 40 years long was I grieved with that generation, and said, it is a people that err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. Therefore I swore in my wrath, they should not enter into my rest. What is this psalm about? Praise to God. Yes. Is it just that? There's a little bit of a trick question. I'll tell you now, this anticipates one of my bullet points. A lot of scholars, perhaps the preponderance, think this was originally two different psalms. And that at some point, someone thought these would work well together and squished them together. Made one psalm out of two. What else is included? Praise, certainly. We have that up top. We are his people, yeah, certainly. I think there's a warning here as well. Right? We begin with praise and the necessity of praise, and we conclude with a warning. Right? There's a lesson there or an instruction about the praise. And these seems at first, perhaps, maybe at first blush, not to be really well related. But I think that maybe there's a connection there that makes sense. The date for this psalm is really uncertain, particularly because it's broadly believed that it was originally two different psalms, right? So you have to try and figure out dates for those. Were they contemporaneous, et cetera, et cetera? There's very little internal evidence. There's no specific mentions of anything contemporary to the psalm. There's a looking back at specific events, right? We have those mentioned. The Exodus is talked about, but that's really not the time of the psalm. The psalm itself talks about that as being in the past. The break in these, where the two different psalms seem to come together, seems to be in 7 and 8. I've actually seen a number of people talk about being in the middle of verse 7, though I don't know. Whether or not this was two of his psalms originally or not is pretty much inconsequential. You could write this as a single psalm. You could write this as two. We do this nowadays, right? People will take an existing song and write an additional chorus for it, or more verses, or that's the sort of thing that people can do. There's no superscription, as a number of the psalms in this particular book within the Psalms do not have, so there's nothing even really traditionally to say, oh, David wrote this, or this is a psalm from this period. None of that. So we just simply have to take the psalm as it stands, which is fine. The invitation in verses 1 and 2 to worship God lacks something in the translation. I mean, it is there, right? Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord, let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. But the words here that are being used in Hebrew, the verbs that are included, have a whole lot more volume to them, an expectation of being loud. I don't want to say boisterous. Boisterous is the wrong word. It kind of implies being unruly, and that's not here. But it is this exuberant, just this really overwhelming idea of celebration that is trying to be conveyed in the first couple verses of this song. You might almost think of it as the way that a crowd would roar at a pivotal moment, watching some championship game, right? Just the overwhelming nature of your exultation and happiness at something, right? This just loud, irrepressible sound is really what the psalmist is trying to convey with the invitation to praise God and how God should be praised. The words, sing and shout don't necessarily fully capture that in English because we don't use those strictly for that kind of noise, though we can use it for that. It's important to understand that just the high degree of enthusiasm that the psalmist is really reaching for here, to really kind of understand some of what follows and how this all fits in, perhaps. I just said that, we'll move on. The end of verse 1 is possible to translate as the rock which saved us. We have rock of our salvation, generally in English, but the verb tense is interesting. It doesn't have to be done kind of in the infinitive. It can be done in the past tense. Right? It can be understood or read as speaking of something that God has already done. That we are saved and redeemed, and therefore, because we are already part of that group, we then praise God in this manner. Instead of being forward-looking, which it can also be, there's a way to translate it that way too. The tense could work to a rock of salvation that is coming, or to a salvation that is not yet achieved. There is also that possibility to invoke praise because we have been redeemed, which I think is got an interesting tie into things that hopefully I will have time to get to later on in the song, depending on how quickly I can go. The thanksgiving that in 2 that he is talking about then becomes that of the people that are saved. So, plant that little seed in your mind and we'll hopefully return and revisit it when it has blossomed. Who are the other gods that are mentioned in verse 3?
The gods of the surrounding nations?
Certainly, yeah. The gods of the surrounding Canaanite nations, quite likely. Yeah. I think that is an acceptable understanding, but I don't think it's necessarily the only one. There's more that we can say about it. Yeah?
Those are made up gods, right?
Yes, they are in some sense made up gods. But even if we don't understand them as being fully made up, if we assign them the status of existing spiritual beings, demonic influences, there is an important thing that is being said about them, though, in this verse, right? Whoever these other gods are, what is the important thing for us to understand from verse 3? Not a trick question.
They're below our God.
They are below the one true God, below the God of Israel, our God. Yahweh is greater than they. And it goes into talking about why this is, and I'm going to anticipate this a little bit. It speaks of Yahweh creating things, and frequently the gods of the other nations, and gods of all sorts of kind of pantheons around the world, even ones that they would not have known about here in Israel, the Norse gods and so forth. are representations of nature. Right? You have the thunder god, you have the god of the sea, you have the god who creates earthquakes, right? You have different sorts of natural forces. But if God is the creator, Yahweh God, the true God, is the creator of these things, then inevitably, whatever their reality that you assign, God is greater than that. He creates the natural forces the other nations worship in foolishness. They are all within his power, and his greatness, his magnitude, his glory ultimately surpasses all of them in a kind of QED proposition. It has to be so. If God created them, he must be greater than they. You don't really have to try and make a comparison. Well, what did your God do versus what it might? If your God is created by mine, then obviously yours is inferior. Yahweh is greater than all of the other gods, whatever their source. Whether you're worshiping an elemental force, some sort of demonic spirit, doesn't matter. The false gods are inferior. He is greater than anyone and anything. The expression of Yahweh is to express the ultimate in being. Boy, I really just spit all my bullet points there. Okay. The deep places, though. What is this, the deep places? And why do we say it's in God's hand? What are they, first of all? The sea? Not yet, in fact, however. We will get to the sea, but the deep places here refer to something else. Frequently, the deeps, is a way of expressing, right, the boundless ocean or the unexplored limits thereof. But this is actually a little bit different. Again, it's all right. It's not really a trick question. It's just a question. I'll warn you when there are trick questions. I try to make sure you know there's a trick answer coming. But
Could he be referring to caves?
yeah, it's actually the caves and the recesses of the earth. Again, though, the same idea as the boundless sea. The places beyond what people understand and can explore. Right? They had a notion that there were ways to get under the earth, right? Like you could find caves that went into the ground, you could dig a hole and you could keep going, but you couldn't reach the bottom, right? They couldn't reach below the earth, underneath everything. And this is a way of expressing the inexpressible, saying that which is beyond our knowledge, even going to the very end where we know nothing about what's there. These are the things which are held in the hand of God. But saying it's held in the hand of God is meant to imply something in particular as well, right? We're anthropomorphizing God and giving him a physical human attribute, a hand, that God as spirit does not literally have. So what do we mean to say that it is in his hand?
In his control.
It's under his control. It lies within his power. And going back to the previous verses, he has created it. By creating it, it is a thing over which he has control and can exercise dominion. Even the things that go beyond knowledge, things that are far beyond what humans can even conceive, they still lie within the power and control of God. They fall in the realm of what he knows and can deal with. But we then follow it up with mountains. Why mountains?
Two extremes.
Yeah, it's the two polar opposites. The highest points of the land, the mountains that no one can climb, the peaks that no one has even seen, however high the mountains go, however deep the earth is, the lowest points you can find, both of these things are within the control of God. It's expressing God's ultimate power, his infinite nature, by using the two polar opposites, the two extremes. Both have been created, both are within God's power. In 5, there's a word and. It's usually translated, for example, in the NIV, the sea is his, for he made it. The word is actually literally and. It's usually translated for in order to give the sense that is intended, which is that it is an explanatory thing. The sea belongs to God because, explaining, because he made it. Even though the word literally there is and. So the sea belongs to God as well. And what do we get when we put 4 and 5 together? We have the sea and his hands creating the dry land. I really like this one. I'm excited about the words. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's another way of expressing everything. Now we might say from north to south and east to west, right? But this is another way of expressing dimensionality in 4 directions. Up and down in the first verse, well, verse 4, the first of these 2 verses, and then side to side. The sea on one hand and the land on the other. All of the ocean, all of the dry land, all of the heights and all of the depths. 4 cardinal directions, kind of, expressing that the entirety of creation is that which God has made and that God holds within his grasp and within his power. There is no place that any person could be or could even conceivably go that extends beyond what God is in control of. It's not the conventional way of doing this that we would normally think of, again, from north to south and east to west. But it's just another way of expressing much the same idea. 4 different directions, up and down and left and right, kind of. It's the entirety of the world. I'm moving quicker than I usually do because I really want to get to the end today. So if I go too fast, somebody flag me down. If I skip past something you want to talk about or ask a question about, please, as always, wave me down. 6 and 7 give us the basis. I wasn't sure how to pluralize basis, so I hope I did that right. For why people should worship God. It's related to 4 and 5. We're told that we should bow down and worship and kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker, because he is our God and we are his people. Specifically, we are referred to as belonging in his pasture and being his flock. Yes, sir?
The reason we were created.
The reason we were created, I'm sorry.
So praise God.
Yes. To glorify God, to bring glory and honor to God is the reason for existence. Yes. To fulfill our obligation as created beings, we must do this. We must glorify God, worship and glorify him. The Maker, though, in 6, interestingly enough, seems specifically to revert to 7. What I mean by that is that rather than saying we are part of creation writ large, that the Maker seems to refer specifically to the people of God themselves. In this case, in this particular time and circumstance for the psalmist, the people of Israel. The people of Israel should worship God because he has made Israel. Why? Why would that be a way to express this? And why would that be an important way to express this? The more you guys talk, the less you have to listen to me talk. And I can't imagine that would be happier for everyone. But I'll keep going if you just keep giving me openings. Yes, ma'am.
Well, this whole first section reminded me of references, maybe a parallel foreshadowing or whatnot of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The reference of, I think about where it's mentioned where he holds the world in his hands and holds it all together.
Mm-hmm.
So when he talks initially about, they're talking about God and his salvation, and then how how he makes all these, how he made the earth, and he makes all these, references to the extremities of what he's made. And then in Colossians, and I don't know if I'm stealing your thunder, if you were going to...
I don't care if you do, go for it, yeah.
At all, but in Colossians, specifically, it almost has very similar language, but in reference to Jesus instead of God. And just, I like the way that Paul kind of, I don't know if he was thinking of this section when he was writing Colossians, or just the way that God and Jesus are intertwined in the way that they're both God. But Colossians talks about how the Son is the firstborn over all creation, and that all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. And then he continues to go through into where in 17 he says, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And just the references, especially like at the end of the section about the sheep, and how often Jesus refers to us as his sheep. I just think it's kind of cool that the parallel of this section referring to God and how he is salvation and things, or he created things, but then in Jesus is also salvation, and that he holds the creation that God made together.
Yeah.
Intertwined.
Yeah, I don't know that I was specifically thinking of Colossians, but this is exactly where I was going with this, right? This idea that the reason for them to celebrate God making Israel is because Israel does ultimately lead to Christ, right? The reason to set a people apart, to protect them through the ages, so that the Messiah could be born from Israel and thus to save and bless the entire world, right? And that is reason for them to celebrate being made by God and being part of those people, is that it will ultimately lead, yes, to Christ, right? That the creation, in some sense, all culminating in that point of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, which is super apropos to have it happen today to talk about this, but yeah.
I think it just amazes me too, like how much, the extreme amount of references there are to Jesus in the Old Testament, and how much of the world misses it.
Oh, sure. It's remarkable in retrospect. I always have to remind myself that I would not necessarily have been any smarter than anybody else, right, prior to the fact. But it does seem obvious in retrospect, a lot like...
Well, even now though, I mean, how many people in the
Sure.
world now, different religions, or atheists, or just, people who might know the Old Testament, who don't correlate anything to Jesus.
It's there are none so blind as those who will not see. I mean, that's certainly true. But yeah, people missed it. The Jewish scholars for years did not have the right expectation. A lot of them did recognize Jesus when he came, right? I mean, he had disciples who followed him around, even if they didn't fully understand what the plan was. But yeah, I got to be careful for myself to not fall into this trap of hubris and think, well, if I'd been there, I would have known. Maybe. I hope so, but there's not necessarily a guarantee. A lot of people that recognized it even in that time after the fact, right? Witnessed Pentecost. Thousands of people sitting there going, we missed it. We missed it while it was happening, but now I see it. And yeah. But yeah, I think that there's just countless instances, like this one, that point towards the coming of Christ and who he was going to be. God has formed the nations, we were just talking about that. And then we have 8, depending on how, again, you divide this up. Some people like to give us the last half or last line of 7. Today, if you hear his voice, but I don't necessarily think you have to think about it that way. The transition into warning and instruction. There's a shift. We have the call to praise, we have the instructions about praise, that we need to do this, and the reasons why, and then the shift about not refusing to do so, about not being as some have been in the past. Right? So we have hardening of hearts at Meribah and Massah. What does that mean? Where is this? What is this? These are real places. Anybody remember?
There were places during the Exodus.
There were places during the Exodus, in the desert.
Meribah is where the water is bitter.
I'm sorry?
Meribah is where the water is bitter.
It is not where the water was bitter, I don't think.
Something happened at Meribah.
Yes, it did. This is where Moses strikes the rock under instructions from God to produce the water that comes out. It's called Meribah because of the quarreling or the murmuring against God that happened there. It was strife, right, that happened, but as a result of them questioning God. There is an interesting sort of illusion here that is then possible if we think about the rock of our salvation back in verse 1. Is my next yeah. That purposefully choosing to talk about Meribah as part of the warning and instruction, after having a reference to God as the rock and salvation, it fits, it ties together nicely. That it was from the rock in the desert that the water, their salvation as a people, their physical salvation, preservation from death, came, that God literally saved them through this rock. It works as an illusion looking forward to Christ, and the reference to Him as the rock upon which our salvation is built. It's a wonderful way of putting it. And then as a warning to not miss, to fail to see the obviousness of this salvation that is coming, that is present and available, and instead turn against God. 9 is warning them about the same sin. And it's important to understand, I think, too, that it's not just simply going, maybe in the manner of Job, I don't understand why this is going on. This trip through the desert seems to be taking a long time. I keep getting a lot of sand in my shoes. This is really unpleasant. All of these things may be true statements, but none of them is actually questioning God's wisdom. You're unhappy. People get unhappy. What happened at Meribah is a little bit different. Do I have my next note? Yeah. The sin for which they are rebuked here seems to go beyond the simply complaint or unhappiness. It talks about this in the psalm as well. Your fathers tested and tried me. Some translations give tempted and then proved, in the old sense of the idea of proved, right? We use prove as to demonstrate, but we do so because the word has shifted its meaning over time. It originally comes from the idea that we still retain slightly, the idea of a proving ground, a testing place. You prove it by putting it to the limits to try and see whether or not it will break. And the idea that you would prove or test God is anathema. To question, is God being honest with us? Is God really faithful? Is not an okay thing to do. Particularly for these people. What had they seen God do?
Hard to see.
He'd seen him part the Red Sea. They'd seen him lead them through the desert with miraculous signs, cloud by day, fire by night. They'd seen the 10 plagues visited upon Egypt to visit punishment and destruction upon Pharaoh and Egypt for their enslavement and to get them set free. They had been fed by manna in the wilderness. They had seen the miraculous signs and wonders. They had seen the expressions of God's love and honesty and faithfulness, and yet they went, I don't know.
But we wouldn't do that.
I would like to think that I wouldn't do that. I would hope that I wouldn't do that, and hopefully I can take my warning from the psalm and not do that. But that was for what they are being punished. This questioning of whether God will really do what he says he will do. We can go back to the end of verse 7. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, etc., as they did. The psalmist is saying, look, you know the same things. We have access to that same information. When you are being told of what has come before, don't be like those people in the past. Don't do what they did, ignoring God's salvation, questioning his motives. But why? that we are told that they have. Let's go down and look at verse 11. I mean, we can include 10, right? 40 years they wandered in the desert. But why was it 40 years? Was it specifically just 40 years of wandering in the desert? No. It was 40 years of wandering in the desert because that's what it took to get to verse 11, in a sense. I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. They had to wander because though they were not being smitten directly by God, they were forbidden from receiving the reward. That entire generation, yes. The people that questioned God in the desert, the people that when they saw the spies come back from Canaan and report, questioned whether God would do what he said. Will God really let us conquer this land? Can we really achieve this? Is God really going to give us the help that he has said he would give us in conquering Canaan? I don't know. And the result was, well, you don't get to have it. They were forbidden from entering the rest. And I think that there's an excellent analogy that can be drawn forward, I have in my note, about the gospel. If people hear the good news, if people know what God has said he will do, and they reject that, what is the consequence? Same thing. Yeah, same thing. They do not get to enter God's rest. Simple enough. Simple enough. Guess I shouldn't have hurried after all. I've reached the end of my notes, essentially. I foolishly have left you all plenty of time today for complaints, if you want to register any complaints. So, not only will I entertain any further questions or comments or going back to any point previous in this psalm, talk about something that I moved past too quickly, something that I missed, anything, you can even complain to me about the class briefly, if you'd like to this morning. I do this, it only happens every couple months that I leave enough time for complaints, so seize the moment if you've been saving them. Anyone? Any comments, anything at all? All right, well, I appreciate everybody's time this morning. I appreciate your attention and attendance, and you've got a couple extra minutes this morning for an extra cookie or a cup of coffee or something. But thank you very much, and we will move on to Psalm 96 next week.